The winter sun was setting over Lebanon in December of 1983, casting long shadows across a country torn apart by war, factions, and foreign influence. It was a land where alliances shifted by the hour, where danger sat on every ridgeline, and where American forces, stationed as part of a multinational peacekeeping mission, found themselves caught in the middle of somebody else's firestorm. But when the Syrians fired on U.S. aircraft and brought them down, the United States answered in a language every adversary understands: overwhelming force from the skies.
We are not looking for a conflict with the regime. Any action that takes away from our ongoing operations to defeat ISIS is a distraction.
This wasn't a planned war. This wasn't a long buildup like Vietnam or the Gulf. This was a sudden retaliation, a sharp, punishing strike meant to make one point very clear: you do not shoot at American aviators without consequences. Tension had been rising for months. Syria, supported by the Soviet Union, had filled the region with dense surface-to-air missile batteries, SA-6s, SA-7s, and radar-guided weapons designed specifically to shoot down Western aircraft. Their jets, Soviet-built MiGs, patrolled the skies above the Bekaa Valley. On the ground were militias, warlords, and armed groups, all pulling Lebanon apart piece by piece. But on December 4th, the situation crossed a line. American A-6E Intruders and A-7E Corsairs were conducting reconnaissance over Syrian-controlled territory when Syrian SAM sites fired. 2 U.S. jets went down, 1 intruder and 1 Corsair. 1 pilot was killed, 1 was captured, and Washington decided enough was enough. The order went out: retaliate. Hit the Syrian positions that fired on American aircraft.
I ordered the United States Armed Forces to launch precision strikes on targets associated.
Strike hard, strike fast, and send a message. Aboard the carriers USS John F. Kennedy and USS Independence, pilots from the Navy prepared for an operation unlike anything they'd faced since Vietnam. They weren't going up against ragtag militants. They were flying into one of the most heavily defended air defense belts outside the Soviet Union itself. The men climbing into those cockpits knew exactly how dangerous this was. The A-6E Intruder crews were first in line, the all-weather attack aircraft built to fly low, fast, and carry heavy ordnance. The A-7E Corsairs, rugged and reliable, would follow with precision strikes. And overhead, providing air cover, were the F-14 Tomcats, the Navy's top air superiority fighters, ready to engage Syrian MiGs the moment they tried to interfere. The engines roared across the decks as each jet was shot off the catapult. The Tomcats climbed high, their wings sweeping back as they accelerated into the Lebanese airspace. The attack aircraft dropped low, hugging the terrain to stay under enemy radar. Below them lay a patchwork of cities, villages, and war-torn hills scarred by years of conflict. But waiting for them were Syrian SAM sites, radar dishes turning, missile crews at the ready, their systems linked to Soviet advisors who understood American tactics well. This wasn't going to be a clean strike. This was going to be a knife fight against a modern air defense network designed to kill. As the American strike packages crossed into hostile territory, the first radars locked onto them. Warning tones screamed in their headsets. Missile crews prepared to fire. The intruders pushed deeper, their pilots calm under pressure. They had flown low-altitude attack profiles hundreds of times, but few missions carried stakes like this. Then the sky lit up. Syrian SAMs launched, streaks of fire rising from the ground, twisting as they searched for a target. The Americans broke left and right, dumping chaff, pulling Gs, and flying evasive maneuvers that pressed them into their seats. But even the best pilots can't avoid every missile in a wall of Soviet-built weapons. The first American aircraft hit was an A-6E Intruder, flown by Lieutenant Mark Lang and his bombardier navigator, Lieutenant Bobby Goodman. A missile detonated near their aircraft, ripping through the fuselage. The plane went down hard. Lang did not survive the crash. Goodman lived and was taken prisoner by the Syrians, becoming a high-profile hostage in a conflict nobody wanted to be in. But the strike group kept going. They didn't have the luxury of turning around. They had a mission to complete.
The only actions that we have taken against pro-regime forces in Syria, and there have been two specific incidents.
7 Corsairs rolled in next, targeting Syrian command posts, artillery, and the SAM sites that had fired the deadly salvos. Bombs fell across the hillside and slammed into hardened bunkers. Explosions shook the ground for miles. The Tomcats, flying high above, watched Syrian MiGs scramble from their bases. The F-14s immediately moved to intercept, locking onto the incoming fighters before they could threaten the attack aircraft. Syrian pilots tested the Americans briefly, but they quickly learned that getting too close to a Tomcat was a losing gamble. The powerful AWG-9 radar and long-range missiles meant the F-14s could engage before the MiGs even knew they were in danger. After a brief encounter, the MiGs disengaged. They wanted no part of a dogfight that would almost certainly end with sidewinders and sparrows tearing through their aircraft. But down below, the SAM threat didn't let up. Another American aircraft was hit, an A-7E Corsair. The pilot ejected and was rescued, but his jet fell into Syrian territory. 2 lost in one day. The cost was real. The danger was constant. Still, the strike continued.
Stuart, it's interesting, when you land on the carrier, it's really on the pilot's shoulders to get the airplane aboard.
American aircraft hammered Syrian positions again and again, destroying radar sites, ammunition depots, and command bunkers. The Syrians returned fire every chance they got, filling the sky with missiles. The air was thick with smoke, tracer rounds, and the thunder of explosions. The men flying these missions relied on skill, training, instinct, and a bit of luck to survive. After the final strike runs were complete, the U.S. aircraft pulled back toward the Mediterranean, low on fuel and adrenaline still pumping. The Tomcats stayed overhead until the last Intruder and Corsair cleared the threat zone. Nobody was left behind this time. Nobody was going to be lost on the exit. When the American jets returned to their carriers, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and grim reality. The mission was successful. Syrian positions had been destroyed. The message had been sent. But 2 jets were gone. 1 pilot was killed. 1 was a prisoner. And everyone on deck understood exactly how dangerous the skies over Lebanon had become. The Pentagon assessed the operation quickly. The results were clear. The Syrians had taken damage, but their dense Soviet-supplied air defense network had proven more lethal than expected. The U.S. had struck with skill and power, but the cost had been significant for such a limited operation. And that was the lesson.
Well, if you've talked to a lot of the civilians around here, you'll find that Maurice Bishop was a fairly popular guy to a lot of people.
Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada, earlier that same year, had shown how quickly and decisively the U.S. military could dominate a lightly defended battlefield. But Lebanon was different. Lebanon was filled with professional Syrian forces backed by advanced Soviet weapons designed to shoot down Western aircraft. Grenada was a sprint. Lebanon was a reminder that even the world's greatest military doesn't get to pick the battlefield, and sometimes the battlefield is built to kill you. The loss of 2 aircraft forced American planners to reconsider how they dealt with high-density SAM environments. New tactics, new electronic warfare strategies, and better coordination between aircraft were developed because of what happened over Lebanon. In many ways, those painful lessons saved lives later. In the Gulf War, in the Balkans, and in every conflict that required flying into heavily defended territory. Back home, many Americans barely understood why U.S. forces were even in Lebanon. It was a complicated mission in a complicated war. But for the older generation, the veterans of Korea, Vietnam, and the Cold War, the news hit differently. They understood the risk. They knew the bravery it took to strap into an attack jet and fly into a missile-filled sky to complete a mission. And they recognized the sacrifice. The Lebanon airstrikes were not a victory parade. They were a grim, dangerous reality of what American aviators faced during the messy conflicts of the 1980s. The operation proved that the U.S. military would respond when attacked, but it also proved that the enemy sometimes fights back with systems capable of drawing blood. The men who flew into that chaos carried out their mission with honor. They struck hard. They protected each other. And they came home knowing they had flown into one of the most lethal air defense environments on Earth and lived to tell the tale. Lebanon didn't end with a clear win or a neat conclusion, but the events of December 1983 showed the world that the United States would not tolerate attacks on its aircraft. Even in the most hostile airspace, it proved that American pilots would face danger head-on, and it forced military leaders to adapt, innovate, and prepare for the next war. For your viewers, the men who grew up watching the Cold War unfold, this story is a reminder of the cost of air power and the courage of the men who've flown into danger for generations. It's not the story of a grand victory. It's the story of bravery, loss, and lessons paid for in blood, and why the skies over Lebanon will always be remembered.